Chadchiachchiga. Chayeko Gank. Hey. Can you speak a little louder? Okay, so I don't have a presentation, but this is just a disclaimer. I am a trained anthropologist and also a trained linguist, and so I tend to get excited about specific phenomenons, and so when they come up in my talk, I tend to like to over-explain them or get caught in the weeds. So in order to subvert that, what I do is I write my script. So and get, you know, to the two our words. I count down from 4 in Tlingit. Daghun. I observe, looking at the students' faces while they stand in a circle. Natsk. And they start to get nervous, shifting their bodies as if they could feel the numbers bringing in awkwardness. Dech. And their eyes get big, making quick glances at each other. Tleich. And suddenly the space is only meant for the Tlingit language. English, as I mentioned to the students before starting, is not to be used. During the next 45 minutes, no other language is meant to be spoken within the circle. I take a deep breath and I begin to teach the language through immersion. The learning and instruction of Indigenous languages includes several social positions: birth speaker, teacher, and learners of various kinds. In this paper, I use birth speaker over fluent speaker. It helps preserve the speakerhood of those who have been raised with the language, and it helps contrast those who have learned it later in life. This term helps us see that language, even for birth speakers, is a spectrum. Yet those birth speakers have an ability that linguists are incredibly interested in: how the language is organized in their minds rather than how the language should be. Sorry. During this immersion, I have been lucky enough to have a handful of birth speakers, all contributing to the lesson. Before moving forward, I want to take some time and slow down and discuss how I am using ideologies as I use in the title of this talk, especially in the context of language. So in essence, linguistic and language ideologies. Like many linguistic anthropologists, I use ideologies to describe positionality and partial perspectives of the world. Judith Irvine and Susan Gale put it best in their book, Signs of Difference, Language Ideologies in Social Life. They say they work via sign relations that entail comparison and perspective. Idealized versions link differences in expressions, features, linguistic and otherwise, to cultural images, constructing stereotypes of people and activities and rendering them convincing. So what they are actually pointing out is that ideologies are thoughts and beliefs that become ways to navigate the world. And where languages come into ideologies is statements and beliefs about language, where in linguistic anthropology, we look into meta-language, meaning language about language. Statements about language are never neutral though, and they are never only about language. Bakhtin, an influential literary critic, said, all words have the taste of a profession, a genre, a tendency, a party, a particular work, a particular person, a generation, an age group, the day and hour. Each word tastes of the context in which it has lived its socially charged life. So one of the examples that I like to use in order to better understand ideologies then is our expectations within our own English-speaking world. So if we can all close our eyes and picture a perfume commercial, what language do you hear? French? French? Who else hears French in this commercial? Who hears Italian? No? Okay. And the other one that I like to use is, let's say that we have to go to a restaurant and everything's full and there's only a food truck. And so we go to the food truck. What language do we expect the workers to speak? Tagalog. Tagalog? Spanish, right? So nothing about these situations are informed of us saying like they have to speak French. But there is a connection to us, our ability to perceive and think about language in these really specific ways, that perfume commercials is seen as a luxury product. So we think about them we connect it to this language, French often, that it's romanticized, and there's a type of prestige to being able to speak French. And then for food trucks, we think of something not as high class. We think of people who speak Spanish. There's no real connection to these moments, but these are beliefs that we all have, and we're able to tap into it. So this is what I am incredibly interested in for the phenomenon of language revitalization. So as you can see, there are many ways that comments and understandings about language is important. When it comes to language, Indigenous language revitalization, we then would expect a site for many kinds of language ideologies, those that come from many vantage points, such as birth speakers, teachers, linguists, students. This is what Koode describes as language ideological assemblages in his 2018 article, where language ideologies about Indigenous languages and multilingualism shed a light on how people think and feel about language. So Koode looks at many beliefs and understandings about language to understand why and how people talk about their Indigenous languages as they do. So this is the assemblages of language ideologies. Although the praxis of language reclamation is community specific, meaning that each community who wants to reclaim and revitalize their language and culture requires different solutions, different ways of implementing these solutions, I model one possible path in which the roles of researcher, curriculum developer, and birth speakers and learners mutually support local goals. I first want to describe a phenomenon that occurred while I was teaching Tlingit through immersion. And during this time, this was maybe the fourth day or so of us doing the language immersion. And they knew the expectations coming in that we are only meant to be speaking Tlingit after I count down from 4. And this is pretty basic language. We were just learning how to say, my name is. And who can tell me how to say my name is in Tlingit? So we have one such example here. So in the lesson that I do, I use the variation, and during this time, it was really interesting because we were already midway through the lesson, and we were going one by one. I was just asking them to say the sentence, and one of the students stopped everything, and in English said, wait, it's not yay, it's you. It's you, Khatuwasak. And this is an incredibly interesting moment because within the minds of Tlingit speakers, birth speakers of the language, they wouldn't do this type of correction, right? This is a moment, an example of language ideology, specifically that of language standardization. I want to make a distinction here first. Linguists are interested in how language is organized in the minds of the speaker, which means which means that a linguist will do some elicitations of speakers to get at the organization of the language. Through these elicitations, a linguist will be able to create rules based off of the speaker's organization of the language. This is what we call descriptive work. A linguist attempts to describe the language as produced by the speaker. Standardization, which uses grammar rules often based off of linguistic work, is not descriptive work. It is prescriptive work. It attempts to tell and instruct people on how one should speak. When a birth speaker says that something is incorrect, it is based off of how the language has been acquired and organized in their minds. For example, in English, one could say something like, somebody could not say something like, truck yellow the is, to mean the truck is yellow. We all have this feeling of, that's not correct language, that's not how you say that. This is what linguists are interested in. How is it that we get at these rules that are internalized in the minds of the speakers? It is not said correctly based off of the rules in the minds of English speakers. Standardization, on the other hand, accomplishes something completely different. The action may mean to help correct language based on what is right and what is wrong. However, what can happen is the erasure of indigenous knowledge. In Woolard 2016, she describes that standardized language has a voice from nowhere, where those prescribing language, what is right and what is wrong, can appeal to a power that is not found in any specific place or held by anyone. At the same time, correcting people's speech through prescriptive means obtains authority to tell speakers of the language what is, quote unquote, correct. It prescribes correct language. Standard language practices appeal to a power as a means of control. It erases knowledges because it deems variations of phrases and words as wrong or incorrect language. So when an indigenous language is standardized, other dialects of the language become subversions or inadequate to speak, especially for those learning the language, if they learn any other dialects at all. Teachers also hold thoughts and beliefs about language that are also incredibly important. Here, though, I want to highlight the work of individuals who have spent hours and years with speakers in our communities. One that I want to highlight here is Ne Tumulok Hyanwudakat Lugnaksha Kagwan Tanka Shankukedi. She tells me about her time with the three famous grandmas in cake. She tells of a time when they're all together working on how to do translations of just a phrase. And there was a comment by one of them who said, it's so great that we have so many speakers here, because look at all the ways that we can say this one phrase, all in Tlingit. And that can happen beyond conjugation. It can happen with the variations of verbs, nouns, phrases, all of these things. Teachers like Ne have the ability to hear how people are speaking, even if it is different from the way that they might have learned. They often repeat language ideologies from their teachers, saying something like, they say it differently, but that's okay. These experiences hold valuable ways to combat indigenous erasure from language standardization practices. I say this because instead of appealing to a voice from nowhere, teachers who have spent time with birth speakers can appeal to a voice of our ancestors. So their voices are still heard regardless of if they are here or not. Birth speakers also offer a lot in understanding about thoughts and beliefs about language. Not only are they able to say what is grammatically correct, but they offer something even more valuable that is hardly talked about: the way in which language is spoken. In many speeches, birth speakers will make comments about our language. Such comments that I found incredibly influential was that by Cecilia Kuntz, Luknaksha. She talked about how it costs a lot of money to talk about yourself. So in this case, she was explaining how she was Chuchtachkhan, And I want to talk about really briefly, if you let me, about a moment that happened at the warming of our hands. So at the warming of our hands, my dad, who's sitting right here, he talked about how he is also Chuch. And when he offered the translation in English, there was laughter. And this is also an example of Indigenous erasure, right? That when Cecilia Coons offered this up as knowledge, when she says, it costs a lot of money to talk about yourself. It's okay that I talk about, it's okay that I do it because I'm a grandchild of myself. To talk about my grandparents is to also talk about myself, right? So when she offered up that, there was no laughter in the audience. But then that was in 1982, and now we're in 2024. We can see that there has been this type of erasure that occurred in our own community. That when this translation was offered up by my dad, that there was this type of laughter within the audience, even at one of these serious times of welcoming the opposites to the community, right? So we can understand that the thoughts about the translations are also something that we can look into as to how best can we combat these settler colonial ways of erasure of Indigenous knowledge. So I think about these moments all the time. These are various vantage points entail an assemblage of linguistic ideology, which may at times conflict with each other. The standardization practice has a result of erasure that the intent behind standardization, though, comes from the need to teach the language and know how to say a word or phrase, quote unquote, correctly. However, as communities work towards language and culture reclamation, each voice, each dialect, all the understandings of our language from birth speakers is informative and valuable, which is often ignored and erased through these same standardization practices. Thus, these are the questions that I'm interested in. What are the best ways to learn a language? What does it mean to speak an Indigenous language? Up until this point, I have been talking about immersion, but I haven't offered up a definition, so that's my bad. I would like to make a contrast between immersion, though, about the way that we might have heard what immersion is, and even our beliefs behind what immersion is. Some explain immersion through experience. For example, studying abroad in a different country is such an example. We get where you're immersed in the language 24/7. We may also think about how we have immersion sessions at conferences such as this in our communities. The expectations during these sessions are just to speak the language. This one style of immersion is also better known as submersion. The point of submersion is to be surrounded by language where people are speaking it around you, and you are meant to either take part or just be a listener. You allow the language to wash over you. This submersion is not the way that I am using the word immersion. Immersion, as I am using it, is a guided lesson where only one language is spoken. The implied and foundational understanding of immersion is that there is a full lesson where it starts off with bits of the language that is used to scaffold to larger chunks or phrases. These students are required to take part in the full lesson, and their struggle to understand and make meaning in the language is all guided by the teacher. But the responsibility of speaking and using the language is by the student. How, though, is it possible to use immersion as described to support local goals, especially by utilizing these assemblages of language ideologies? So I have described various language ideologies, that of standardization, those comments and how Indigenous or how our elders are talking about things. How is it that we are supposed to subvert these standardization practices that erase Indigenous knowledge? How is it that we are able to do that? And how is it that how are we supposed to inform our curriculum by the voices of our ancestors? So we can think about the comments that we hear all the time by our elders. We can listen to the comments that are by our students, right? So I think about this this time when I was at Gold Belt Heritage, and I was talking with one of the students who have been learning the language for quite some time. And I just made a simple they were telling me what clan they were. And so I responded, oh, Chaknach Keisitia, after they just told me Chaknach. So if you don't know what that means, they told me that their moiety is Chak. And then I asked the question, oh, are you Chak moiety? This is a simple type of conversation that Tlingits do all the time. If you are learning the language and you say something to a speaker, they will often ask you back the same information. So the pattern goes, Chaknach Hatsiti, and then a speaker might say Chaknach Keisiti, Chaknach Hatsiti, oh yeah. That is something that you can hear all the time, but because they were never socialized into the speech patterns of Tlingit, they are caught off guard by that simple question. And the only difference is one small little sound, which is ga. How is it that one small sound can subvert all that learning, right? So these are the things that we're up against. So these are what kinds of ideologies that I'm thinking about and we're facing all the time within our language lesson plans. The way that this helps me write curriculum, though, is actually quite simple. Language teaching can often look like decontextualized language. So what that means is that it's just language in language. There's nothing contextualizing it, nothing about it that actually says what it is, what makes it Tlingit, right? So one of the examples I like to use is if I say, I'm hungry. Are you hungry? Yes, I am hungry. Are you hungry for this? No, I'm not hungry for that. What about this is Tlingit? It's not, right? We don't have that understanding of if it's Tlingit or not. It's just simple translation. And we're not interested in simple translation. We're not simple here. So where then can we... So these types of things, we're just thinking about filling in the blanks, sheets like grammar practices. The emphasis is on learning language rules rather than the culture. Immersion offers a way to centralize the culture. And the method of immersion teaching, a method that was taught to me by Dr. Sheila Nicholas, which she developed for her community of Hopi, taught to me at the American Indian Language Developing Institute at Arizona University. We center immersion around a script. This script is a cultural event and activity, which means that to get to the script, you as a teacher need to get to the cultural event and activity through the language. In the summer of 2022, I was able to apply this immersion method for the federally recognized tribe of Douglas Indian Association, where instead of the students learning to introduce themselves by memorizing this static script that we often see, the Tlingit protocol is to actually introduce somebody else. Very frequently in other language classes, second language learners memorize their introductions and use this script to speak to an audience. But the script that I had decided to go with was and the response would be kook. And then I would say, Yan duen yedua sauk ho achon chsetia, kagwantanach seti, gauhetach, right? I'm not talking about myself. Instead, I'm introducing my older brother here. In order to do that, you have to know how to ask questions. You have to know how to gather the information and then reiterate that to a new social context. Right? And I was able to do that by just starting off with one word, and that was khat, right? So all of that language all started by scaffolding with the bit of the language, which was khat, and then getting to this larger context. When I created this language lesson, I could hear the voice of Cecilia Kun saying how expensive it is to talk about yourself. My role as a curriculum writer was to respond to that. Though I doubt that the students will have to pay for this debt of talking about themselves, I, as a teacher of the language and culture, applied this cultural teaching and warning from birth speakers and comments from second language learners to the language immersion curriculum. The beauty of immersion teaching is that the students learn the language experientially. The teacher is there as a guide for pronunciation and good sentence structure. The way that the lesson is implemented then socializes the student culturally. By introducing someone else, it shows the ability to understand language, to use it dynamically, and to demonstrate these language skills through a cultural event. In this class that I taught, the students achieved the learning outcome, which was for them to do Tlingit culture rather than to talk about it. They were then able to introduce somebody else to their cultural clan opposites, opposed to self-introductions as individuals, as is often modeled in settler colonial greetings. By investigating how birth speakers of the language orientate themselves to revitalization, it offers an avenue to how they are differentiating between what is Tlingit and what is not. This kind of knowledge and logic is what we can consider indigenous. The purpose of these language ideologies allow me to answer to the community's needs by creating language lessons through an immersion method. It lets me analyze the process of indigenization, settler colonialism as a process. It offers a lot of rich data for language ideology, identity, and how it is that indigenous people exert indigeneity in the face of erasure, and how indigeneity just by being can ignore settler colonial in its entirety. So in this paper, I explored how meta-pragmatic framings of language teaching and learning inform the creation of language reclamation materials for the Tlingit community, drawing upon Downhauer and Downhauer, my aunt and uncle, in their 1998 article, Frameworks of Ideological Clarification. I show how the creation of community-oriented materials can be a site for reclamation and indigenization of pedagogy. So if you have any questions, I'm available. Ish.
Yes, many things that you share, Koode, is always an eye-opener for me in regards to our cultural standards. And it's very pleasing to me to hear the standards that you're aware of and how you teaching us how to guard them and how to bring back some of our cultural standards. Because I know among all, I guess I could say all of us have a certain amount of how we downplay our own values, which is caused from the Western culture of how in their culture they can downgrade pretty much anything they want to, and that's just their culture. I'm also reminded by someone I work with and someone who's, I suppose, well respected for knowing the language. And many times I use the term "Ushjingach tu shachka." You know, that's just a ceremonial phrase. But he took it he started funning with it. He says, "Paul, we're going to go hold hands, okay?" You know, and in English it doesn't sound right. But he knew that, and so when something's said like that, it's hard to gain respect back for them, towards them. So I guess in a sense, I just want to say thank you, Koode, for sharing with us. I know it seemed really fast for me, but it was very clear. And Anybody else?
I want to go in the middle over there.
I think you're in the middle, Grandpa.
You're in the middle.
Yeah.
I think you're in the middle already.
Oh,
It's
well,
o-
turn me around then.
Okay. Your brakes are on.
Just one side, yeah.
Okay. Oh. Wait, you wanna grab that first? There we go. Do them back.
My favorite part, our language. Every time I get a chance to speak to people about our language, I have to say this. You've got to bring it back, Sue. You've got to bring it back. We just about have everything. Just about. Except going out camping to dry fish, dry deer meat for the fall time, and to bury some coho fish heads in the sand for kink. Kink. I don't think they know what it is. How about caviar? Fish eggs. Dat zou ik zeggen, Juke Gatan. Well, anyway, all of you, if you are a teacher, I can say this to you. Hier ga je gewoon stakkat je aan. Ga je terug, is het je. Ja, ha je getan gedaan. Ha je terug, is het je. Ja, ha je getan gedaan. De jaka je ha nog je aan de zag. Ha je getan. Ha nog je aan de zag. Ja, dat kan je. Ha kochte je aan de zag. Ha niet hadden. Kochte je aan de zag. Ja, ha je getan. Because of that, our language was just disappearing. It was just disappearing. But now it's starting to echo back. It's starting to echo back. It's because those of you who want to be language teachers, it's you that's going to help us bring that language back. I was very fortunate when I was growing up. My grandfather, George Davis, in Sitka, every place he went, he took me with him. Whenever we went hunting, whenever he went hunting, I went with him. Whenever he went hand trolling, I went with him. And all the time, all the time we were on the boat, Tlingit came out, only Tlingit, not one word of white man. Not one word, all Tlingit. That's why I want to say, Atuna Khaya Keha or what? Hayaka Yukatangi to Ochti. We grew up hearing our language all the time. Definitely they would not allow us to do it in school. But once we got home, boy, it come right out. I keep on imploring you to do this. Keep it up. Keep it up with the language. If any of you are teachers, I find out that it's, some of the words that are written in books. Be careful, because when some of the words that come out of the book sounds different when you bring it out. All our language is formed right here and right here. Just take hakusi hakus tiye isakuo achaya ayakakati kaid isatu kaid ye sha tu. So be careful when you're teaching. If you're teaching the language, especially when you talk about our culture. You know, back in the old days, maybe when somebody would say something wrong at a koik, but they wouldn't jump up and say, hey, that's wrong. Hey, you're saying that wrong. No, they wouldn't do that. When the party's over, everybody's shaking hands and going out with the inu. Is that right? Inu. They're going out with the inu. But get this, the person that noticed something wasn't right, he waited till the party was over. And he waited until everybody was gone. And then he talked to the person, to the head of the person that was in charge of the party. That way they can avoid conflict. That way they avoided conflict. Oh, there's so many things that I want to talk about. But how much time do we have? Oh. There's a sign that says we have all night. So, almost everything that we did almost everything I did, I learned from my grandfather, George Davis. When I went trapping with him, was in the middle of the winter, December and January. But when January came, one day we went down to the boat, and here it was iced in. So you know what we did? We chopped our way out to the harbor. He wouldn't let the ice stop him. We chopped our way out into the harbor, and then he started up that 5-horse. We had a 5-horse Johnson, a double-ender skiff. That little double-ender skiff, boy, I went in a lot of storms with him. But every time we sat down to eat, he'd pray in Tlingit. Both of us were Russian Orthodox. I never wanted to change when I was a Russian Orthodox. My father sang tenor in the Russian Orthodox. And that's where I got my tenor voice from. But what I'm trying to get at is what you things that you learn. Sometimes you learn about it from home, where you live. So if you hear the Tlingit language where you live, listen to it. Listen to it. Listen real hard. That's what I was working up to. You people are very young. Keep on trying to learn. If you're Tlingit, keep on trying to learn our language. And my wife, Vida, she was an Eskimo. Is there anybody here that's Eskimo? Well, my wife was a Inupiaq from Bristol, from Pilot Point in Bristol Bay. Her parents had died, so she was sent down here, and she lived with Mary and Eddie Marshall. They were already elders. So their language was Tlingit all the time, every day. Their language was Tlingit. And that's where she picked it up from. And the Inupiaq Eskimo. She picked the language up from there. When I was working at the Pioneer Home, I saved up enough money for her to go home for a while, to go visit her mother and father. But she refused, because she wanted me to go with her too. But I just didn't have the money, because most of what I saved went all to the airline tickets just to get her home. But she learned the Tlingit language. Man, she was speaking it better than me. She was speaking it better than me. And one of her best friends down in the village here was Frida Carlson, Frida Young. Are you here, Frida?
She's not here today.
She had two good friends down here, because most of the other Tlingits were picking on her because she was Eskimo. So every time your parents speak Tlingit at home, listen to them. I know, I know it's hard for me, especially when there's a football game on the TV. Try to turn that TV down so you can hear them, instead of hearing all the cheering coming from the TV. Yiko ayokwan. Yiko ayokwan. Takat yohan. Kai tatu yiksati ye. Yaha yukatan ke yes. Wáan kanin sawe. Koode de hasukay da kakisaak. Achayag te katshilten. Yaha yukatan ke yes. There's a cutter there. Koske was a cutter. Kukla yakaksul dog. Chashyata ya. Chashekoti. Haani. Haadkanani. Achaya yiko khon. Tlingit yukatanki. Oh man, you guys will have to forgive me. My computer is 91 years old, just like me, and it's beginning to shut down. I hope it doesn't shut down all the way while I'm still speaking here. Because I want to come home. I want to go to that dinner tomorrow night. Thank you for allowing me to speak this long. To say the things I wanted to say. And to do the things I want to do. It's to continue to support all of you that are teachers, all of you that are Tlingits and Eskimos. My children, I describe them as Tlingamos, part Tlingit and part Eskimo. There's another good one I like to do, sing. But this is going to be a good one. Because seeing all of you here, you light up my life. You do. You light up my life. You give me hope. And you do. You give me hope that our language and our thinking won't be going. You give me hope to carry on. Now I'm carrying on because I see so many teachers and thinkers that want to be to work on. Oh man, I forgot about the adu, the blankets and stuff like that. You light up my life. You give me hope to carry on. Light of my life. See, all of you that are teachers here, all the young people, you're the light of my life. That's how I describe this song. I know it's a white man, but it covers all of you. And I like it. Just like the one I always sing all the time. If I were a rich man, yabba dooby dooby doob, dooby 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 dum. All day long I biddy biddy bum. If I were a wealthy man, I wouldn't have to work hard. Yabba dooby 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 dum. All day long I'd biddy biddy bum. Idle diddle 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 dum. I'd build a big tall house with rooms by the dozen right in the middle of the town. A fine tin room with real wooden floors below. I'd build one long staircase. I'd build just one long staircase just going up and one even longer coming down and one more leading nowhere just for show. I'd fill my yard with chicks and turkeys and geese and duck for the town to see and hear. Squawking just as noisily as they. And then you'll hear a cheep and a and a squawk would fall like a trumpet on the air, as if to say, here lives a wealthy man. Oh man, I wish I knew the rest of the song, but I don't know, maybe I don't know, maybe. Coco, go sing it, Kaina, Kosia. So, Kate, Woosh al cow cut the tea. Yabba dooby dooby doob, dooby 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 dum. Takat yaggy, dooby dooby dum. Woosh al cow cut the tea. Teach, take the nature quanny. Yabba dooby 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 dum. Takat yaggy. Dooby dooby dum, idle, dum. It came, ya on the game. That's the one I have a hard time with. So. Say say kinde katek yende just katek just Koode just kokash pui I really mean it, though. You guys light up my life. You give me hope to carry on. I think all of you are going to help me live a little longer because you're going to keep my heart beating. Oh, no, I better not. Anyway, thank you again. I'm going to choose. Okay, just